Hello everybody and welcome to Atris Studios. Today we're going to be creating a 2D character controller. Now I know it seems rather complicated and it can be sometimes, but we're going to just stick with the basic motions of just being able to jump and move left and right. So we're not going to really discuss the environment. One thing that I will say before we actually get into the scripting part of this tutorial is simply that you need to make sure that there is world collision for your character to be able to interact with. Okay, so once we since we got that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and get started with our character. So to begin with, I'm going to delete that. To begin with, we want to be able to first add in our character. So we're going to come over to the hierarchy, we're going to right click, and we're going to create an empty game object. Now we're going to rename this empty game object player. The next thing we want to do is reset the transform of this character. So we're going to just simply come over here to the inspector, select this little ... sign and press a reset. So now if we come over here, press the W key, you can see we now have an empty game object right there. So we want to add a couple components to this object. We want to first go over here to add component. We're going to add a capsule collider 2D. We're going to add a circle collider 2D. Make sure that we set that to its trigger. And lastly, we're going to add a rigid body 2D. Inside the rigid body, make sure that we change the gravity scale to like 1.5, or you can adjust this based on what your game needs. We're also going to change the collision detection to continuous, sleeping mode to never sleep, because this is the player, so we want it to constantly be updating. And of course, last but not least, let me actually close that up because I got my display covering this area. We want to check this freeze rotation on the Z-axis. That way our character's not going to roll forward. Okay, so we now have that taken care of. We want to select this tag, and we also want to change it to player as well. Alright, so we need some form of sprites for this. Now I have all the assets that you see here are all free on the asset store. So if you need to and you just want to be able to play around with it, you can always go straight over there and grab those. I'm going to go over to this bandit pixel art sprite. I'm going to go over to the sprite itself, and I'm going to find one of the bandits. So we're going to just grab this guy right here and then drag him in. Now preferably, I prefer my characters to be looking the other way, so facing the right direction. But you know, sometimes you just got to deal with what you got to deal with. So we're just going to leave that like so, and we're going to change the y-axis to 0. That way, whenever we press our player, its y-axis is going to be there. So now what we want to do is adjust our capsule collider. Now, as we can see, our capsule collider is not sitting where it needs to be, so we're just going to just adjust it like so. Make sure that it is roughly around where the character's feet is. It doesn't matter if it goes a little bit under or a little bit over, as long as it looks good. So that one's done. We also want to set up the circle collider. Now the circle collider is a little bit more important because this determines if we can jump or not. Now I know there's other ways to be able to do this. I just find this the most convenient way. So we're going to drop this down to a 0.05, and we're also going to adjust the position. So maybe make that a 0.05. Yeah, that looks about right. So now our character is capable of detecting the ground. Okay. So before we actually get into everything else, I want to go ahead and set up the animations. Now, on a normal basis, I'd already have this stuff set up, but since some of you guys might not know how to animate these characters, we're going to go ahead and do that. So make sure that you have your character selected. I'm going to rename this character as the player_GFX, and then we're going to select the bandit pixel art folder, which is where the sprites originally came from. I'm going to create a folder, and I'm going to call this My Animations. So once here, I'm going to open up my animation tab. Okay, if you don't have this tab, go over to Windows, then you're going to select the animation tab. Go over to animation, and boom, you got it. It'll pop up. Simply dock it right there. So like I said, select your player, make sure that you press the create. And what's going to happen is it's going to put it inside the folder that you last had open. Now, the last folder I had open was my animations folder. If you don't have this pop-up, that's okay. You can simply find it by selecting one of these things. Now, the first animation I want to do is I want to call it idle. So we're going to just type in idle and I'm going to press OK. So where are we going to get these animations from? Well, these are pixel art, so simply drag your project folder up here, select your sprites folder, pull it out, open up your character sprite sheet, and we're simply going to drag those right on in. So let's just go boom, boom. There we go. I think that's it. So now our character is able to be idle. The next thing we want to do is create a run animation. So we're going to just simply type in run, and we're going to do that too. So we're going to roll down here and drag these in. So that's 8, number 9, number 10, number 11, number 12, number 13, number 14, and number 15. So now our character is able to run. And lastly, we're going to create a fall animation. So boom. And for this, it just needs one single animation, so we're going to just drag that in like so. Okay, so we now have all that taken care of. We're going to drag our project panel back down here, and we're going to select our player again and find our My Animation folder. So we want to be able to now organize this animation controller, which automatically is put on this character because it is being animated. So we're going to double click this animator controller. And as you can see, all of our animations are there. Now we could leave this like this and simply call these animations in script, but I like using the mechanim way, especially for simple animations. So I'm going to simply delete the idle and run animation, delete those, drag the fall animation up, right click on the any state to make transition here. Then I'm going to right click inside an empty space, create state, and we're going to create a new blend tree. So this blend tree, I'm going to call it motion. And once you create a blend tree, it's going to create a float parameter. So we're going to double click this and we're going to call this speed, like so. And since we're already over here inside the parameters, I'm going to add a new parameter, which is going to be a boolean, and we're going to call this is falling. Now keep in mind how I spell this is very important, because when we go into the script, we're going to need to make sure that these are spelled the exact same way that they are. Otherwise, it's not going to call correctly. Okay. So we're going to right click the motion state, and we're going to set as layer default state. Then we're going to right click the fall, and we're going to make sure that we make this transition to motion. So whenever it passes this any state, if it hits the fall animation, then we're able to transfer back into the motion state. So now let's go ahead and set up the transitions. And I don't think we actually set up the blend tree just yet, so we're going to get to that after we set up the transitions. So I'm going to select this transition into the fall state. What we want to do here is we're going to go over to settings. We're going to say transition duration is equal to 0, and can transition to self is equal to false. We're going to roll down, set the condition as if or is falling, or if is falling is equal to true, then we're going to do this. And then we're going to select the next transition, and for this we're going to take off has exit time, then add a condition, and it's going to be if is falling is equal to false. So in other words, we're just going to call this once whenever we start falling, and we're going to call it once whenever we stop falling. Let's go ahead and double click our motion blend tree, select the blend tree, and we're going to add 2 fields. The first field is going to be idle, and the second field is going to be run. Now we can update these thresholds. Right now it is set to automate thresholds. So if I wanted to set this at 0.5, then it's going to start at 0.5 to 1, 0.25, so whatever I wanted to set it to. For now we'll leave it at 1, but keep in mind if you want a more reliable animation, you want this to be set at a lower number. That way the moment that you press a key, it's going to instantly set it to run. Okay, so I'm going to press Control S here, and now what we want to do is go over to our project settings, because I want to knock out everything that we can inside the editor before we go into the scripting. So we're going to be using the old input manager system I don't really like the new version. It's way too complicated, and yeah, it's just not my thing. So we're going to just use this. Now, keep in mind, we're not going to be adding any new custom inputs. We're just going to be using the old ones. Also, make sure that you go over to Physics 2D and change this from whatever it is right now, -9, I think, to like a -26 or -30, whatever you feel like. The reason why I advise to increasing this is because right now, at a -9, it feels like your character floats whenever they hop inside the air. So you just want to increase that a little bit, give it a little bit more weight. Okay. All right, I think that's all we really need to do right there. I do want to be able to increase the player size, so I am going to change the scale of the overall player. That way I can change the collisions as well without having to adjust anything. So let's go over into our scene, and we're going to drag our player down a little bit, like so. Make sure our colliders aren't interacting. Okay, that's perfect. So I'm going to hit Control S. Now, the next thing we need to do is go over to our scripts folder. If you don't have that, that's okay. You can simply select your assets folder, right click, go over to create, and select folder. Inside here, you're going to create a C# script, and you're going to call it player. Now, my player script folder is completely empty, so great. Now we're going to go get into the fun stuff. The first thing we need to do is create a couple serialized fields. The first one is going to be a private float called speed. And we're going to make that equal to, I don't know, maybe like a 10. The next one is a serialized field, and it's going to be a private float, and this is going to be our jump force. And we're going to make that equal to, let's just say 12 for now. Then we're going to create a private float, and this is going to be our x direction, so x-dir. This means that this is going to determine our input. We also want to make a private bool, which is called isFalling. Very similar, if not exactly the same, to our animation controller parameter. And let's see, oh yes, we also are going to need to get a private rigid body 2D, which is going to be called RB. We're going to get a private sprite renderer, which is going to be SR. And we're going to get a private animator. Animator, yes, I can't spell, I know. And we're going to call this anim. Okay. So now we have these three components that are going to allow us to be able to have movement, switch the direction of our character, and also animate our character. But to be able to officially get these inside the game itself, so we know and identify where these objects are or where these components are and how we can use them, we're going to call them all instead of the void start function. That way it doesn't clog up the game's memory. So we're going to say RB is equal to get component, and we're going to get the rigid body 2D. But our sprite renderer and animator are part of a child game objects components. So what we want to do with our SR, which is our sprite renderer, we're going to say get component in children, and it's going to get the very first component that has a sprite renderer. And luckily we only have one, so we're good. We're going to do the same thing with anim, or the animator. So we're going to say anim is equal to get component in children, and we're going to simply type in animator. Okay, so we call all those. Let's go ahead and set up our update functions. So we're going to say void update and void fixed update. Now the difference between void update and void fixed update. Void update runs every single frame and is designed for things such as inputs and quick action events, while fixed updates is used more for physics. So anything that happens moving the character wise, we want to run inside the fixed update versus inside the void update. So what we're going to do here is we're going to call the input direction. So we're going to say get input. Now for this input, as you know, we created the xdir variable. So we're going to say xdir is equal to input.getAxis, and we're going to call it horizontal. And of course, like I said, that is an input name that you would find inside of the project settings. So the next thing we need to do is we're going to set direction, or set character direction. And for this, we're simply going to say, okay, if it's a negative value or a positive value, then we're going to change the direction that our character is facing. So we're going to say if xdir is greater than 0, then we're going to grab sr.flipx is equal to true. Then we're going to say if xdir is less than 0, then we're going to say sr.flipdir or flipx is equal to false. Now you may have to change these up depending on what character orientation your current character is. So if my current character is facing right, and if I flip it now, and basically if I set it to equal to true, and it makes it look the opposite direction, then I don't really want that. So we'll adjust those if need be. Okay, so we have that. We set the direction. We also need to add in a jump feature, so we're going to say jump. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to say if input.get button, and we're going to call the jump button, and not, which is a exclamation mark, is falling. And this is where we're going to call the jump function. So for a character to jump, we really just want them to be able to move up inside the world. So we're going to grab rb.velocity is equal to a new vector 2. Now currently we don't really want to affect the motion of our x value, so we're going to say rb.velocity.x. So we're going to get its current velocity and we're just going to apply it to the motion. And for the height, we're just going to call that jump force. Like so. But we don't want to continuously jump as well. So we're going to say is falling is equal to true. Now this is going to be a double check because whenever we run our on trigger functions later on, we want to be able to set this to where it's basically going to reset that. So yeah. All right, let me see. Am I forgetting anything here? Oh yeah, animations. That is the last thing that we need to do inside this one. So we're going to say animations. And for animations, we're going to try to make this as simple as possible. So we're going to create a float called anim speed, which is equal to a mathf dot absolute of the x direction. Now what an absolute does is basically turns a negative number into a positive number. So if I have like a -1 value, if I get an absolute value of that number, then it's going to equal 1 versus being a -1, or a -5 is going to be equal to 5, something like that. Okay, so now since we have that, we're going to say anim.set float. We're going to set the speed value of our motion state, and we're going to call that equal to anim speed. For our falling, we're going to say anim.set bool. Type in is falling, and we're going to make it equal to is falling, like so. Now for our motion, so we're going to call this motion. We're just going to say rb.velocity is equal to a new vector 2, and for this we're going to grab our xdir multiplied by our speed. Then we're going to set rb.velocity.y. So now we have the ability to move our character however fast we need to move. All right, so now we just need to put in the ability to reset our jump. So we're going to create a void on trigger, enter 2D, a void on trigger, stay 2D, and a void on trigger, exit 2D. Now this may seem complicated at first, it's really not. So what we're going to do first is start off with the onStay 2D. So we're going to say if not is falling, return. So if we aren't falling, I want us not to even run this onStay trigger. Otherwise, we're going to say if GameObject or if collision.tag is not equal to GameObject.tag, then we're going to say is falling is equal to false. So what this is saying is if we're detecting a collision, then we're going to set is falling is equal to false. And we're going to do the same thing here. So on trigger enter, we're just going to set it equal to false. And on trigger exit, we're going to set that equal to true. So this right here is the double check that I was talking about. If it doesn't detect here, then it's going to detect here. If it doesn't detect here, then it's going to detect there. All right, so that's all that you need for the code. I know I went through it pretty fast, but it really is easy once you just get it down. Okay, so once this thing compiles, we have one more thing to do, which is, of course, setting up the physics for our character. Now, when I say the physics, I'm talking about the physics material. Because with these characters, especially since we're using rigid bodies, what's going to happen is the character's going to hop up against a wall and they're going to just stick because the friction value is too high. So we want to go over to our assets folder. We're going to create a brand new folder, and we're going to call this physics 2D. We're going to go inside that folder. We're going to create a 2D. We're going to go over to physics material 2D. Now, we're just simply going to call this player. We have two different options here. Normally with the 3D physics, you have a whole lot more options, but since we only have two, we're going to set the friction to 0, and we're going to set the bounce to 0.2. You don't really have to put a bounce inside there. I just think it's pretty fun. We're going to select the player. We're going to go over to the capsule collider, and we're going to simply drag that material right on top of the material here. So I press Control S. I'm going to go ahead and right click that, which is going to be maximize. We're going to hit play, and we're going to just watch the magic happen. Of course, compiling and all, fun stuff. But anyway, also, while this thing is loading up, I did want to say, if you guys are interested in game development, I am very curious about your journey. So just let me know what sort of got you into game development in the first place. Oh, by the way, I just noticed something here. Now, if you're looking at this character and you're wondering, well, why is he doing that? What is he doing here? Well, the reason why he's not doing anything is because we didn't add the player script on the player himself. So let's quickly do that. So we're going to go back here. We're going to select our player and just simply add that player script on there. So player, boom. See this, people? This is what happens when you do things live. I know. I get it. It's a thing. All right. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this tutorial, by the way. It took me quite a couple times to actually get it just about right. As you can tell, though, there's always something that comes up. But here goes nothing, right? All right, and let's also maximize this thing. So, as you can see, our character is capable of hopping, moving, and just running into things, which is awesome. Boom. All right, I hope you guys did enjoy this. If you did, make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, whatever else. And of course, I'll see you guys next time.